show you how I made these two Backrooms videos, Mall Run and Outpost. There are going to be spoilers, so if you haven't seen them yet, they're going to be the first link in the description. All the software is free, so if you want to make your own Backrooms videos using these techniques, you can. We'll start off with the first scene in Mall Run, where I fall into the Backrooms. The video begins with a CGI trash can clipping under the ground into the Backrooms. I used Blender's built-in motion tracking features to select 8 points in the footage to track, and Blender used those points to solve for where it thinks the camera is in the 3D space. You can then put any object in that 3D space and it'll track to the footage, but it won't have any lighting. To fix this, we'll need something called an HDRI, or a high dynamic range image. These are 360-degree images that surround the scene and are used to light it. It's basically the skybox. We'll need to make our own. There are multiple techniques to make your own HDRI, but the method I chose was the chrome sphere. In professional productions, these spheres are used to capture the light in the environment by taking a picture of the reflective sphere and unwrapping that image. Since I didn't want to spend $1,000 on a professional VFX chrome sphere, I opted for a much cheaper home decoration ornament. I took multiple exposures of the sphere so that the program could tell how bright parts of the image are. I used Photoshop's HDR merge to combine the images into a single image that has both the color and the brightness data. I then used a custom Photoshop plugin called Flexify 2 to unwrap the image into our full finished HDRI. Now we can use it to light the trash can, better blending it in with the scene. We also need to add a contact shadow between the trash can and the ground to simulate the light being blocked by the trash can. We can do this with a shadow catcher, which will only render the shadows and reflections that hit it. It will also hide the trash can once it falls underneath. Now we can start creating the Backrooms. Since the rooms are almost always square, we can start with a cube and stretch it to however large you want the room to be. We can texture the rooms with repeating images like these. Now that we have the room, we need to make the ceiling. The lights are randomly selected by this node group. There's a link in the description to a tutorial that goes into much more detail. Once we have the lights in the room, we can render an image. I chose the Cycles render engine, so Blender will fully path trace the image. The render engine works by shooting rays out of each pixel and bouncing them off objects until they hit a light. This takes an enormous amount of computing power, and I'll get back to that later. Rendering images in this way mimics how real light bounces, so it gives us a very realistic result. This even allows for things like refraction and photorealistic glass. Now that we have our render, we should give it some effects like lens flare and bloom. Let's animate the camera and give it a realistic camera shake. I used a Blender plugin called Camera Shakeify to add the camera shake. This plugin applies a camera shake animation on top of pre-existing camera movements, so it doesn't take a lot of effort to get realistic results. The large mall section was created by duplicating a single layer using the array modifier. The glitch section of the Backrooms was created using Blender's geometry node system. It's a procedural system that can be used to scatter and randomize objects. Everything is controlled by these nodes, so it's really easy to move everything around with one click. For the reveal of the Outpost, I wanted the rooms to go from claustrophobic to huge and open to help create the impression that this is a very unnatural place. I even used a mist pass to darken the furthest parts of the image and make it appear even deeper. Everything is modeled by hand. I wanted to have a rover exploring the backrooms, as the scientists by this point realize how dangerous the backrooms really are, and it gives them the ability to explore without putting themselves at risk. The camera on the rover is a complicated shape that would be very difficult to model, so I cheated a little bit by taking pictures of my real camera and using that as a texture of a low poly model. This section was created using Blender's line art modifier. It checks where the camera is and then overlays lines on top of the object. All of the moving parts of the drill press are tied together with drivers, so they all move together from one controller. This part was created by taking a Voronoi texture node and warping it a little. Then I made the texture move by animating a separate XYZ node and mixing the texture using a linear light setting. You can then use this texture as a mask to mix between the wall and a transparency node. To get the movement of the pliers to seem natural, like a hand was holding it, I actually used the Camera Shakeify add-on to add the handheld movements. Since you can only use the Shakeify plugin on cameras in the scene, I got around this by parenting the pliers to a camera that is invisible. The pliers will now follow the natural looking movements of the camera shake. You can use this trick on pretty much any object to get a quick and realistic handheld look. Now that we have our animation done, we need to render it and give it the iconic VHS filter. This is the part that takes a lot of computer power. Blender has to calculate how the light bounces off the objects in the scene for each frame. This is called rendering. Then it applies the compositing like lens flare and bloom, and then saves the image in a folder. My computer has a 3080 and a 1070 Ti working together, and it still took over a minute per frame to fully render. Since Meydan and Outpost together are 39 minutes and 41 seconds long, running at 24 frames per second, with every frame taking around a minute to render, both of these episodes combined took 39 days to render, with no breaks. My computer running the entire time, not to mention the crashes, and the time I rendered 1,000 frames where I forgot to make the camera visible on the rover. But now that we have our frames, we can put them into DaVinci Resolve. The program will automatically recognize image sequences like the ones we just rendered, so we can just drag it in and it treats it like a video file. Then we can do the sound design here by putting together sound samples. The VHS filter was created using a real camera pointed at my TV. The camera records to an 8mm video cassette. This one has an analog video and audio out, which I plugged into this HDMI converter. That HDMI signal goes into this USB capture card, and that basically tricks my computer into thinking it's a webcam. Then we can use the Windows Camera app to start recording. Now all I had to do is play the Backrooms animation directly from the DaVinci Resolve timeline and capture that. For some reason it tries to stretch the 4x3 signal into a 16:9 one, and we need to correct for that by compressing it back to 4x3 in Resolve. Now, after all that, we finally have our finished Backrooms video. While digital VHS filters are pretty good, and honestly a lot easier to implement, to me there just isn't a replacement for an actual analog video signal. That, combined with path tracing the entire image, and a camera shake tracked from real life footage, is how I get my Backrooms videos to look realistic. These techniques will definitely evolve and get more complicated for future episodes as I get better with these programs. There should be a noticeable improvement between each new episode as I'm focusing heavily on realism and the techniques used. I'm planning on making these as long as people watch and like them, so if you want to see more, you should subscribe. I do read every comment, and I'm interested in hearing any ideas you might have for a Backrooms video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. These techniques will